During today's session, we will address these four sections. First, an introduction to the justification process. Secondly, we will examine the INPhINIT and the Junior Leader Fellowships from the point of view of their economic allowance and the eligible expenses. In the third place, we will discuss payment requests. And finally, Albert will explain how the audit platform works. You will go through the first 3 points with me. And after that, Albert will start the intervention about how the audit platform works. Once he finishes his fourth point, we will open a round of questions. To ask your questions, please use the chat. Take into account that it's possible that during my intervention or during Albert's intervention, your doubts could be solved. So I would recommend you not to rush. Because, as I said, it's possible that your questions, your doubts are solved during our explanation. So let's start now with the introductory notes. As you know, the amounts corresponding to each fellowship are transferred to the host institution where the fellow is going to work. So it's the host institution, the one that manages the expenditure of the amounts. In order for La Caixa Foundation to verify that these amounts are being spent, are being allocated correctly, each year for each fellowship period, the host institution has to complete an economic justification. And this justification is done through the online audit platform. You can see an image on the slide of this platform. For new centers, for centers that have not worked with us previously, what we do is we register you in the platform and you receive an email with the access information. Besides that, we also send you a welcome email attaching the web link to our repository and some important indications. And for centers that already have La Caixa Foundation fellows, we wanted to tell you that between this week and next week, we will upload in the platform the INPhINIT fellows of call 2024 that were not already in the platform. And we will also upload the fellows of Junior Leader call 2024 that started in August, September, or October. So for the centers concerned, we will also send you an email when the upload is complete, but we wanted to mention it in this session. Okay, I mentioned before the repository. For those who are not familiar with the audit platform, don't worry, because we will provide you with the web link to our repository. In the repository, you will find the user manual on how to use the platform, the INPhINIT and Junior Leader financial guidelines, templates that you must use in the ordinary management of the fellowship, videos. This year, we also have incorporated a new section of facts with the questions that you ask us most frequently. And you will also find many more materials. Of course, these documents, these facts, these materials of the repository will be updated periodically. And we really encourage you to read them carefully because today we will see some aspects that we consider important to discuss with you. But of course, we cannot explain everything in this session. Well, we said before that for each fellowship period, the host institution has to complete an economic justification. The INPhINIT and the Junior Leader Fellowships consist of 3 periods, or 4 periods in the case of the INPhINIT Fellowships from call 2024 onwards, as you will see in blue on the slide. But to make the explanation easier, let's stick with 3 ordinary periods. Each of these 3 periods correspond to 12 months of active fellowship. And it's important to stress the word active. Why? Because if the fellow does not go in any temporary leave, those 12 months of active fellowship correspond to 1 normal year. But if the fellow goes on a temporary leave, the time that the fellow has spent on temporary leave is not considered to be active fellowship. And what do we have to do in those cases? When a fellow incurs in a situation of temporary leave, what we have to do is the host institution must inform us by email as soon as possible. And what we will do is that the period affected by the leave will be extended by the number of days of the leave. For example, a fellow has been on sick leave for 20 days during period 1. Well, these 20 days are added at the end of period 1. And of course, if we change the end date of period 1, we will also have to change the start and end date of period 2 and period 3. Here, it is important to note that since temporary leaves suspend temporarily the fellowship, it's not possible to justify labor costs incurred during the leave. But in the case of the Junior Leader Fellowship, what you can charge is the research costs that are not paralyzed by the suspension and that must continue to be paid during this suspension. For example, maintenance of equipment or the payroll of associated personnel. Another recurrent question that you may have is what happens if the fellow resigns? Again, you should inform us by email as soon as you become aware of the withdrawal, and in the case of Junior Leader, at least 3 months in advance. We will modify the periods in the audit platform according to the date of the withdrawal indicated in the resignation letter. And of course, when we calculate the fellowship settlement, we will prorate the amounts according to the days of active fellowship. Okay. And finally, another doubt that you may have in relation to the periods is in what period do I have to justify an expense? Well, here the general criteria is the date of the invoice, not the date of actual payment, not the date when the activity takes place. General criteria is the date of the invoice. For example, one of your fellows has to travel to a congress that will take place at the beginning of year 2. And for this congress, you pay the registration and the airline tickets during year 1. Well, since the invoices are dated in year 1, they must be justified in year 1, regardless of whether the congress takes place in year 2. And let me make one remark here. Of course, all the activities have to take place within the duration of the fellowship. We will not accept, for example, an invoice in year 3 of an activity that will take place after the fellowship. Okay, let's move on to the second section. We'll start with the INPhINIT Fellowship. The INPhINIT Fellowship comprises 3 sections: labor costs, research costs, and the tuition fees for the doctoral program. In previous calls, as you may know, the tuition fees were understood to be a part of the research costs, but now from Fellows of Call 2023, research costs and tuition fees are separate categories. Starting with labor costs. Since Call 2023, we transfer 35,800 euros per year for labor costs. With this amount, the host institution has to cover both the gross salary and the hiring costs. Actually, in the platform, you will see that within the section of salary, you need to distinguish what is gross salary itself and what are hiring costs, such as social security contributions, carta refeição, or other concepts. And important to remember here, since Call 2024, at least 25,000 euros per year must be allocated to the fellow's gross salary. As for the research costs, we transfer 3,500 euros per year. In the financial guidelines that you will find in the repository that I mentioned before, you will see a detailed breakdown of what expenses are eligible, what expenses are not eligible, and what expenses may or may not be eligible, depending on whether you have obtained previous authorization. We wanted to comment with you that in our latest update of the financial guidelines, we have added in the category of eligible expenses the books related to the fellow's research. As you may remember, before books required previous authorization, but now they are directly eligible in the INPhINIT Fellowship. And in the slide, you will see that the word previous authorization is highlighted in red because since last year's guidelines, we do not accept authorization requests for expenses that have already been incurred before asking for the authorization that it is needed. And finally, third category is tuition fees for the doctoral program. Here, there is no maximum amount for the payment of tuition fees. And we will explain later how you need to request the payment of the tuition fees, since some of you have been asking lately about this. Other important considerations about the INPhINIT Fellowship. As I said before, research costs cannot be consumed beyond the end of the fellowship or the thesis reading date, if the thesis reading date occurs before. The expense invoices and the activities for which these expenses are incurred have to take place necessarily within the duration of the fellowship. And important, please remember that it's not allowed to buy equipment such as computers or tablets after the third year of fellowship, and it is not allowed either to buy more than one informatic equipment with similar functions during the fellowship. Deadline for submitting the economic justification. It's 2 months from the end of the period. So, for example, if the period ends on September the 1st, the deadline is November the 1st. And since last year, remember that we have a 2 month period for corrections. Alberto will explain to you later how to activate this period for corrections. Now, I just wanted to mention it. The main idea here is that there are 2 months of ordinary deadline plus 2 months of period for corrections. But if the host institution exceeds the initial deadline for submitting the justification, take into account that this excess will be subtracted from the deadline for corrections. For example, you have 2 months to send the justification, but it takes you 3 months to send it. As you may see, there is 1 month of excess. Then you will not have 2 months of period for corrections, you will just have 1 month of period for corrections. And we also wanted to comment with you before we move on to the next slide that we are thinking of a formula so that the fellow can agree to what is justified in each period. But as for now, it's being studied. When we know more about it, we will let you know. Okay, Junior Leader Fellowship. The Junior Leader Fellowship is a bit different from the INPhINIT Fellowship since the Junior Leader Fellows might be entitled to receive family allowance and mobility allowance. Mobility allowance, it's aimed to cover the costs of moving and settling in the country of the host institution. As you see in the slide, if applicable, the 5,400 euros of mobility allowance must be paid as a one-off payment at the beginning of the fellowship. Family allowance. Family allowance is aimed to cover the cost of family conciliation. If applicable, it's 1,200 euros per child, and this amount has to be paid in payroll pro rata. Just a quick reminder here, Starting with the fellows of code 2023 onwards, this family allowance can be received from the month following the birth. It's not necessary to wait until the annual renewal of the fellowship. And focusing now on salary and research costs, until call 2023, you may remember that the annual allocation to cover salary and hiring costs was 59,000 euros, of which at least 44,300 euros had to be allocated to gross salary of the fellow. Well, now from call 2024 onwards, we have increased this annual allocation to 64,000 euros per year, of which at least 47,000 must be allocated to gross salary. Those justifications in which the gross salary does not reach the minimum amount determined in the core rules will not be accepted. And 38,500 euros are transferred annually to be spent on research costs. You will also find in the Junior Leader Financial Guidelines an exhaustive breakdown of which expenses are eligible, which expenses are not eligible, which expenses can or cannot be eligible, depending on whether you obtain previous authorization. Some expenses on the list that you can see on the slide are common with the INPhINIT expenses, but some others are different. So please check each guideline in order to know what is eligible in each fellowship. For example, in the Junior Leader Fellowship, overheads are eligible up to a maximum of 10% of the annual amount of research costs. That is 3,850 euros. And of course, as long as the fellow agrees to it. Also, remember that in the Junior Leader Fellowship, it's possible to hire personnel to assist the fellow if you obtain previous authorization. And you will see that the requirements for the hiring are explained in detail in the financial guidelines. And one last example, in the Junior Leader Fellowship, expenses that exceed 1,000 euros in the last 3 months before the end of the fellowship need previous authorization. They are called the end of fellowship expenses, and you will also find more details in the guidelines. And just before we move on to the next slide, we wanted to clarify something because we've been receiving emails and authorization requests about this. You know that at the beginning of the fellowship, the fellow prepares a budget of how they expect to spend their funds. Remember that this budget is not binding. It can be modified, and you don't need to request authorization to do so. We wanted to clarify this because, as I said, we've been receiving authorization requests to change expenses in the budget, and it's not needed, really. And just as I said before, in the Junior Leader Fellowship as well, research costs cannot be consumed beyond the end of the fellowship. And of course, the actions the activities related to the research cost expenses and the dates of the invoices of these expenses must necessarily take place within the duration of the fellowship. The deadline is exactly the same, 2 months from the end of the period, and there is also this 2-month period for corrections that I mentioned before. We wanted to show this slide with you just to remind you that starting with the fellows of code 2022 onwards, the rules limiting the transfer of remaining research costs from 1 year to the next one are totally applicable. What is this rule about? Let's imagine that I'm a fellow and I have not spent the entire research costs of 1 year. The question is, can I transfer the remaining funds to the next year? Yes, I can transfer the remaining research costs to the next year, but there is one limitation. In the case of Junior Leader, the maximum amount that I can transfer to the next annuity is the 30% of the research costs awarded. That is 11,550 euros. In the case of INPhINIT, the maximum amount that I can transfer is the 50% of the research costs awarded. That is 1,750 euros. So if my remnant is superior to this limit, the difference between my remnant and the limit will not be retrievable. We understand that just explaining the theory of this rule can make it a little bit difficult to really picture it, to really understand it. And that's why in both the Junior Leader Financial Guidelines and the INPhINIT Financial Guidelines, we have included an annex at the end with a practical example of how these rules operate, so that you can get an idea with real numbers. I think that it can be very, very helpful, and I really recommend you to read it. And regarding payment requests, the first annuity, as you know, is fully paid after the signature of the agreement. And then for the following annuities, there are two options. Option 1, once the economic justification for year 1 is submitted and accepted by La Caixa Foundation, the host institution can then request the full annual payment for year 2. Option 2, the host institution requests half of the annuity right before the start of year 2, and once La Caixa Foundation validates the economic justification for year 1, the host institution requests the remaining 50%. And the same procedure works for the amounts for year 3 in reference with the economic justification for year 2. We also wanted to point out that it is the host institution that must request these amounts. We do not order payments by default. You will find the procedure to ask for the payments in the financial guidelines. And also, we have included the explanation in the new facts section. And 2 additional notes. As I said before, remember that starting with the Junior Leader Fellows of Code 2023 onwards, you can apply for the amount of the family allowance at the time of the birth, since this allowance can now be received from the month following the birth. You don't need to wait until the annual renewal. And to finish with this slide, and since we have been getting a lot of questions lately, we would like to make a special mention about tuition fees for the INPhINIT Fellows of Code 2023 onwards. As I said before, from Code 2023 onwards, tuition fees are a separate category, and they are no longer considered to be research costs. And now the host institution is responsible for requesting from La Caixa Foundation the amounts incurred for tuition fees. That means that this request must be done to reimburse the amount previously paid, not as an advance. It's always a reimburse. You must use the same template as the template used to request the payment of the regular annuities. And remember that this template requires a specific order number. You will need to request this order number from us. And it is not the same order number as the one used to pay for the annuities. So please always send us an email or contact us to ask for this specific order number for tuition fees. Like I said, don't worry, because what I have just explained is also explained in the facts section. It's also explained in the guidelines, so you will find it there very easily. And now we will move on to section 4 about the audit platform. I give the floor to Albert.
Thank you, Lorena. Okay, so now we are going to briefly walk through the audit process in the audit classroom. Okay, so everything is understood. So first of all, uh, what will be um, what you have to do when you enter the system? The first step of the economic justification is to designate who will be the responsible for the economic justification itself. Okay, so this step is done by the organization manager, and this user has to select who is going to be the responsible for the economic justification, fellow per fellow. Okay, so it may be a specific economic justification responsible, or also the organization manager can be selected, him or herself, to perform that audit process. Okay, so just take into account that you can only select one responsible for each fellow. As the organization manager has more permissions in terms of usability and what he or her can do in the economic justification process, the organization manager, sorry, will be able to see and to edit anything related to the fellow audit process. Okay, so just designate and select one responsible for the economic justification, and always the organization manager will be able to see the whole information of it. Okay. So one thing that you can ask is or an issue that you can have in mind is that why, if I am an economic justification responsible, I don't see a specific fellow to audit. So that may be because the organization manager has not designated that fellow to you yet. So when we inform all the fellows in the system, uh, the organization manager will be able to see all of them that have been already charged, and the organization manager has to select and designate you to that specific fellow. So if you don't see a specific fellow that you should have been seeing it, you are supposed to see that specific fellow. Please contact with your organization manager to designate you to that uh, audit process. As for reporting expenses, just very briefly, you should go to the information required tab on the period that you want to inform. Press the plus button in blue color that you can see it here. In the desired category, you have two main categories, the salary one and the research cost category. And in case of junior leader, you also have some specific blank boxes where you can inform those amounts in terms of overheads and mobility and family support amounts. In the case of INPhINIT, we will see later, you also have an information box about the tuition fees. Okay. Also, as Lorena said before, there are some expenses that have to be authorized previously. So in the financial guidelines, you can find which of them have to be authorized previously, and please take into account that the word previous is quite important here, because we will not accept authorizations applied after the expenditure of an expense. Okay. And also a hint or a tip that we can give you is that if you don't see a specific authorization when you want to register an expense that has an authorization related, please be aware and confirm before that this authorization has been approved by us, because if you don't see a specific authorization in the drop down when you want to register a specific expense, it may be because the authorization has not been approved yet, or it is not related to that fellow or to that period. As I just said, in infinite audit processes, in the information required tab, you will find also this blank box to inform about the tuition fees. Okay, before it was included in the research fees, but from call 23 there is a separate category, so you can inform the amount just here. And in the case for provisions for the end of the contract, you can justify a provisions for the end of the contract on the corresponding box. Also, as I said before, you have this blank box to inform the corresponding annual amount. It is just an informative field, okay? And in year 3, when the end of the contract comes, you have to register the payroll or the supporting document that includes that provision, okay? So in year 3, it will be a registered and a real expense included in the justification. Okay, so now some of the best and worst practices. Just please take into account that for the salary, you have to record the salary monthly. Okay, so 12 items that have to be registered and not only one, as you can see on the image on the right. Also for equipment and other expenses that require authorization, please remember and select the correct subtype of expense, because if we see some of these expenses that are not correctly categorized will not be accepted. For example, this equipment that is correctly selected as acquisition of IT equipment on the left will be perfect, but please do not select the other expenses or some other subtype of expenses that are not related correctly to the expense itself. Okay. For junior leader, also just the same example regarding the selection of the subtype of expense. In personnel costs, the subtype that you have to select is personnel cost, not other expenses. And for overheads, just use this box, informative box, to register the amount and do not select other random subtype of expense that are not corresponding to the expense. Regarding travel expenses, please group them as many as possible. If there is an expense report available at the center that the fellow has to complete, you can justify the expense with that document. And for junior leader, also we ask you to group all the costs related to non-hired personnel in just one item, okay? And if there are more than one expenses, you can add to the system an Excel file with all the detail, or in the observations and in the comments area of the expense, you can also detail of all of the amounts that are corresponding to that total amount of the expense. So once you have informed and you have registered all the expenses regarding that specific economic justifications, you will have to generate the audit sample, okay? So the system will select some of the expenses that you have to upload the supportive documentation, okay? And you will see that ones with the status of pending evidence. Once the audit sample has been created, you will be able to add new expenses to the economic justification on a new tab that was not before. Then when you generate the audit sample, it is created a new tab called Other Documentation, where you have to upload that supportive if documentation. Okay. Once all the evidences have been provided, and you submit the economic justification to us, to the auditors, the justification will be blocked and you will not be able to do anything at that time. So we start that revision in the audit process. Okay. When we review all the expenses, we will return to you the economic justification, and you will see that some of the expenses may be accepted and others that will be not accepted. Okay. For those who are accepted, you will have to do nothing. They are correct, and that's it. And for those who are not accepted, you will have to provide more information or additional documentation, because maybe this is the expense is not correct because the amount is not correct and does not correspond to the document that you have provided, or maybe there is a proof of payment pending, or there is a additional document that we may require. So this is what just I explained. And once you may have provided all that additional information or additional documentation to the audit process, we will review again. And once everything is just right, we will close that economic justification. We will send it to Lorena and the team of fellowships in La Caixa to perform a last check so that everything looks okay. Okay. So in that case, the status will be pending closure. So that means that from the point of view of the auditors, everything also is okay. But we need another internal review, more in terms of quality of the information, so that everything can be um, finished and we can close the economic justification. And as Lorena said before, we have a final remediation period of 2 months. So once the economic justification is closed, you will have 2 months to ask for a remediation. In the case of you forgot to record or to justify some expenses, you will have some time to do that, and the time that you have able to do that will depend on if you um, send the economic justification in the first period according to the deadline or not. So as just Lorena explained, if you accomplished with the deadline, you will have no problem to demand that final remediation period, and you will have 2 months more to ask for a remediation and to ask for some expenses maybe that you have forgot. You can include it on the economic justification. Okay, that's all from my point of view. If you have any questions, please use the chat and we will answer it.
Okay, thank you, Albert. Let's start with the questions then. Elena Pinto asks, for 2022 projects, is it necessary to order the number for the tuition fees? No, tuition fees constitute a separate category from Code 2023 onwards. So for fellows of Code 2022, tuition fees are a part of the research costs, are included in the research costs. Claudia asks, is there a session for Caixa Impulse or La Caixa Health? I don't know. You should ask our colleagues in Caixa Impulse or Health Research. I don't really know. Sorry, Claudia. Here at NMS, we can have access to the audit platform. What I would tell you is please send me an email. I will write down my email on the chat and we will look into it with Albert. Also, we will add here the web link to our repository.
Okay.
We will wait a couple of minutes more in case someone else comes up with another question. Well, then, if there are no further questions, that would be all for today. We want to thank you again for attending this session. Remember that it has been recorded, and we will send you an email with the presentation and the recording. The recording will be also uploaded in our repository. Remember that the web link to the repository is on the chat. And have a good day. See you soon. Thank you for your attendance today. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.